know that we were talking about these sort of geopolitical issues all along, but here at Davos, and when you look at Davos and World Economic Forum, is Davos turning from an economic forum into the launchpad for a new global power order? And who actually voted for that? And when Donald Trump is talking about peace, it seems to me that he's not talking about ending wars. He's talking about reorganizing the world into rival military blocs. What's your understanding of that, Michael?
Well, his idea of making peace is to wage war against all the enemies, and when you beat them, there's peace because the war is over and they're defeated. And the reason all of this is relevant at Davos is it's all ultimately about economics. I mean, that's what's triggered the whole war. If the American strategy as a whole is to take over the world economy, to keep the dollar in the center, to keep to create this new rules-based order, then you can't be more economic than that. And the question is, what's Europe going to do about it? China has reacted in a way. Russia's we're waiting for it to happen. Iran is waiting for it to happen. And you've had two recent guests on that have been just wonderfully explaining what the key relevance of Greenland is for all of this. You've had John Helmer and you've had my friend Craig Roberts saying it's all about, it's not really about rare earth elements or minerals at all, because these minerals are under a kilometer of ice and glacier, and you're not going to get to them for quite a while. It's about military and it's about control of the sea. And it's not only about um, uh, getting control of Greenland as the 51st state, but as the named U.S. ambassador to Iceland has pointed out, it's to make Iceland the 52nd state. There's no point in taking Greenland over militarily unless you control Iceland also, because then you have a kind of seaborne Maginot line. You've got everything from Canada to Greenland to Iceland to Norway, all in a line, and that blocks access from the North Atlantic into the Arctic Sea. And of course, that's the whole idea of the Arctic Sea melting and letting there to be transport so that Europe doesn't have to go around either South Africa or the bottom of Patagonia in South America. It can just go very simply to the Atlantic to the Pacific via the Arctic. That's what the Trump wants to block, just as he's wanted to block China's investment in the port on the Panama Canal. He wants to control the law of the sea. Well, the problem is that this is against all international law of freedom of the seas. That's the basis of international laws, and it's written into the United Nations Charter. So, what Trump has tried to do, in addition to talking about Greenland, is this Board of Peace. That you've been mentioning. And you're right, the Board of Peace is we will declare war on everyone who does not agree peace on the American terms of the new Cold War order. And Mark Carney had given a good speech yesterday saying, this the whole idea of the rules based order was all a fiction. And they're trying to play with our minds. They're trying to make us think of the order as really being something that serves uniquely the United States without really coming to terms with the fact that this reverses all of the body of international law, not only that was included in the United Nations Charter in 1945, but goes all the way back to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, national sovereignty. So you can look at Trump's speech and those of Besant and the other people who were there saying, we really want to nullify all reference to national sovereignty. Well, the question is, what's Europe going to do about it? what has complicated things is that Trump didn't merely want something that NATO wants and that Denmark wants, which is to militarize Greenland, which is to fight Russia. Denmark is just as anti-Russian as Germany and Britain. Trump wants to actually own Greenland so that he can say he's expanded the United States for the greatest extent since James Polk in 1844 when he grabbed, much of Mexico with Manifest Destiny. And America's Manifest Destiny was extended all the way to Asia already in the Spanish American War, when it said, well, we need the Philippines as part of America's destiny to control the seas. We need Hawaii to control the Pacific. So all of this control of the sea is an attempt to complement the America's war against China's Belt and Road Initiative, trying to integrate Eurasia with each other and with China. It's all about geoeconomics, and geopolitics is geoeconomics here. So the fight over Greenland is sort of one step to taking over Iceland, and the Trump's major backers, the Silicon Valley people, look at Iceland as not only militarily but as a vast support of energy through its volcanic, it's hot water. It's volcanic. Iceland, I think a decade ago, leased all its volcanic power in the north to aluminum companies to do aluminum refining, since aluminum is made out of electricity. And it didn't get anything at all in exchange for this. The aluminum company said, we're going to employ a few Icelanders there. I think 7 or 8 Icelanders were employed. And I spoke to 3 prime ministers of Iceland about this, and they all said, well, there's nothing we can do. The big families in Iceland are all very pro-American. And so this is really what's complicating everything. What will Iceland, if Europe gives up about Greenland, it's going to give up about Iceland. It's going to essentially say, we're going to block Russia's access to the sea, not only the access to the Arctic, but its trade with Cuba and Venezuela in the Atlantic. It's access to the Baltic Sea, which is already they're seizing tankers. The seizure of tankers is technically an act of war. If a private company seizes a tanker, that's piracy. If a government seizes a tanker, that's an act of war. I don't see Europe responding in any way trying to stop this by, for instance, going to the International Criminal Court and accusing Trump of being a war criminal. The Financial Times, of all people, his papers, has been emphasizing again and again, here are all the things that Europe can do to block the United States. And one of the wild cards here is that those agreements that von der Leyen made, the surrender to Trump over the U.S. tariffs that were imposed on Europe in exchange for its givebacks of total subordination, have not been approved by the national parliaments yet. And you can be sure that all of this European response in national parliaments is blocking them, I think, from surrendering to the Trump's tariff and give back demands. So you're just seeing the rise up of European realization. Well, maybe we should begin to do what we'd threatened to do when, as a response to Trump, maybe we should begin taxing the America's internet companies and Google and Facebook for in the same way that we tax other companies. Maybe we should not give special exemptions to the United States. There are all sorts of things that Europe can do, but to start things off, before all of this, you had the head of NATO, Rutte, write an amazing memo sucking up to Trump, saying, I'm with you. We do want to what you're doing in Greenland is wonderful. We've got to talk as soon as you get to Davos. I'm with you. We'll block the fact that European politicians may not want that. Uh, and most of the European politicians are really quite silent, and the newspapers, Financial Times and others, say, well, maybe they're talking among themselves as to what to do, but this is really the showdown. And as you just pointed out, Trump's Board of Peace is basically it. He wants it to replace the Gang of Seven, to replace really the United Nations. He's saying the United Nations is the old body of international law. The Board of Peace will have the rules-based order, and that will be a new form of international law where the rest of the world are satellites. The United States, Russia, and China are really the three powers. And the national security strategy said, well, we have to recognize India, and of course, Japan. Well, Japan is just a satellite of the United States. And what's happening is something very much like how the Catholic Church took over Europe in the 11th century, when they made it. They had all sorts of warlords. They wanted to subdue Germany. They wanted to conquer the Eastern Christianity out of Constantinople, but they didn't have an army. So they made deals. First with Robert Guiscard in Sicily and southern Italy, and then William the Conqueror. And they actually drew up contracts with each of these leaders saying, we will make you the king of Sicily, the king of England, and we'll recognize you with the church, we'll legitimize your rule, but you have to sign a contract. And you have to give us control of all of the finances of your church lands there. The church was the largest landowner and the largest economic center, as well as the social center of Europe. And you have to the money that you collect in Peter's pence, the contributions to support the poor. Instead of supporting the poor in your social spending, you have to send it all to Rome. And William the Conqueror signed, and Robert Guiscard signed, and that basically became a format that turned other countries into satellites, first of Rome, but then after the Crusades fell, Rome lost the power, and all this control over governments passed into the international banking class. And it was the bankers that sort of said, well, now we're telling governments, in order, you have to give priority to paying all of the war debts that you've taken on to us, to put foreign creditors first and to put our power first. And that's what led them to back the Protestant parliamentary countries that were willing to tax the entire population to pay their debts. And all of this has happened before. And each time the European governments have surrendered. And this time they're not surrendering to an abstract international financial group. What is different is that the United States wants to control the international financial system itself, the international trade system, international investment, the law of the seas. You have a huge power grab that Trump is trying to do. And the question is, what are if other countries do not fight back, they're going to end up essentially in a unipolar society where they are diverting their social spending to military spending to try to break up Russia and China until they too can be drawn into this U.S. centered system. That's the U.S. national security strategy that was just published a month ago. And that really is what's at stake in Davos right now.
Richard, jump in.
Nima, let me try to, as often happens, complement in a way what Michael has just said with a bit of a different interpretation. First, I too was struck by Ruta's statement because it exemplified to me that in every European capital, the leaders, and I, by the way, mean every European capital, the leaders are trying to figure out which way the wind is now really kind of blowing, whether it's safe to break away from the United States or it isn't. Can you imagine a unified Europe taking a different position? Or will that simply be the occasion for the French to betray the Germans and the Italians, both of them, and the Scandinavians still again? They haven't been able to overcome the results of the Treaty of Westphalia. You know, nationalism was the midwife of the transition from feudalism to capitalism in Europe, which is why capitalism has remained so committed to the national mentality and the national framework for understanding long after it didn't make much sense anymore because of the economic development. And I think you're seeing that right now, number one. Number two, my understanding of the grabbing of Greenland is that it's all about the struggle with Europe. The United States is taking an immense gamble. It is gambling that it can subordinate its allies and turn them into slaves. Transform Europe from the ally you needed to come to terms with because it's the front line against the Soviet Union into Europe that is will do for you what Central American countries have been doing for you for a long time. I also think it's delusional. The statement on the 4th of December that we have talked about, that national security, that's a delusional argument. That's a well written version of Mr. Trump's incoherent press conferences. It also confuses Greenland and Iceland because they are indistinguishably a problem. And what is the problem? Europe. The United States wants to take Greenland because it's a way of subordinating Europe. The fear in New York is not that Russia or China take Greenland. There isn't the slightest shred of evidence that they need it or want it or covet it or plan on it. Not one word in 20 years. What is the problem? The problem is, and I sure hope my friends in Europe are listening, the problem for the United States is that Europe would finally do something about Greenland. That Europe would say, we're going to get the energy that's available there, and we're going to get the rare earths or whatever it is that we can find under the ice as it melts. They don't want that to be some other country. And they had nothing to lose because the more menace the United States undertakes, the more billions it spends to threaten Greenland, the better the deal that will be cut by the Cobalt Company, a company you ought to look into that is already has invested for years in Greenland, and some of whose major shareholders are Silicon Valley companies, Amazon, Apple, Peter Thiel, all of it. This is an old issue. They don't want to have to give Greenland huge amounts of money. They want the government of the United States to use taxpayer money to go in there and make enough noise to compel a better deal. More bases for the American military, more investment, cheaper fees to pay, fewer Greenlanders to hire. This is a very old game of using the public money to subsidize privately profitable enterprise. And in this case, with the added goal of not getting the Europeans involved because that'll just make it all more expensive. And they've had to give up already on one of these. Mr. Trump said he won't use military force. Well, that's a problem. He hadn't said that before. He didn't want to have to say that. That was forced out of him by what? By the risk that if he didn't do that, the Europeans might actually figure out what was being done to them and put up the resistance that could make a difference, which they still can do, but they would have to find the unity, which they do not have, and they would have to find the courage, which they do not have, to do this thing. They can still do it. It's in their hands. Mr. Trump is very upset that it isn't in his hands. Now, a word on that. It is possible to play big power politics when the world is what it was in the 15th, 18th, and 20th centuries. You cannot do that now. We don't live in the colonial age. We live in the anti colonial age. The vast majority of the people of the world are committed to an anti colonial way of thinking. Oh, yes, there are exceptions, and there are people who use that language for their own benefit, of course, always. But that is the case. And if you try to do a colonial activity during a period of anti colonial sentiment, you are going to fail. Not only are you going to fail, you're going to end up having to do things that will contribute to your failure. Israel is trying to establish a colonial settler regime in Palestine. You could do that all in the past. That's how Palestine was created in the past. You can't do that now. And if you try, you end up in things like genocide and an isolation in the world that Israel will never overcome. And the United States is playing big power politics. It's too late, Jack. It's too expensive. It's too late. You're not strong enough to do it anymore. This, what is changing the world? I mean, I'm overstating it, but I want to make the point. What is happening in the world is not a rupture created by Mr. Trump. All due respect, and I don't have much for Mr. Carney, for him to say that he now figured out that the last 50 years have been a hustle on the world means that he has finally figured out what 50 years of Marxist analysis of neoliberalism was able to produce far better than anything he's ever said or written. Oh, he's another one. Real late, Jack, for you to understand. But what's disrupting the world isn't Mr. Trump. What's disrupting the world is the evolution of capitalism from the private type that we have in the West to the hybrid private plus state version in China. Socialism, if you like. The Chinese have every right to that term, just like everybody else does. China is the problem. China's proof that it can grow faster than everybody else and then harvest all of the political, ideological. My God, that's the issue. Let's not be fooled by thinking that Mr. Trump, that clown, trying to cope, which he can't do, with the challenge of China, which he can't do, dancing around the edges. Yes, he grabs tankers. Michael is absolutely right. He's trying to figure out how far can he go. they learned in Ukraine, not very far. Okay, now they're going to try something else. Even the interest in the ocean is because what they were able to do on the land, the United States, here's what they were able to do. They lost the war in Vietnam, they lost the war in Iraq, they lost the war in Ukraine. You know what? That's a lot of loss. Hundreds of thousands of American troops didn't solve the problem. It's not boots on the ground, Jack. It's China and everything that that represents. The core economic growth has moved from the west to the east. That's the problem. And until you come up with a plan to deal with that, and the United States hasn't begun to do that, you are, if you pardon me, playing around on the edges. Could you provoke a world war? Of course. Does it have to be taken seriously? Yes, and that we try to do that on this program. But let's not be taken in by what they find to be moving theatrics. They were all excited. They stood up and gave Mark Carney a standing ovation because he was the only one who said a little something that sounded like courage. Wow. Wow. Mr. Carney had the courage to say that he now wants us to know what, again, 50 years of Marxist and even other beyond the Marxists were able to teach us about neoliberal globalization, which has been critiqued from the beginning. It's just that bankers like Mr. Carney don't read the relevant literature. They think they're above it, so they can figure it out 50 years later.